Hello, Rebels of the Sherpa Revolution. Normally, I start off this podcast by saying hi, but I'm going to start this one off by saying hydration. We know how important hydration is for our bodies. It's the thing that keeps us running, right? You want to be a well-oiled machine. You want to be running efficiently. You know what can help you run efficiently? Liquid IV. It is the category-winning hydration brand fueling your well-being, and their hydration multiplier is the one product that you are missing in your daily routine. It comes in a little stick that's a powder, and in just one stick, you get 5 essential vitamins and 2 times faster hydration than water alone. If you use it first thing in the morning, maybe before a workout, when you feel run down, maybe after a long night out and doing a little partying, you know what I mean? And even, what if you have like a long flight or something like that and you just bleh, right? We all feel that way, bleh. So add this to your water, and that convenient packaging can go with you anywhere you go, even if you're going to the gym or you're traveling or you're at work and maybe you didn't have a great breakfast. At least it's something that will fuel you up in the morning. And there's a whole bunch of flavors that are available, like sea berry, strawberry lemonade, Concord grape, lemon lime, pina colada, tropical punch, watermelon, strawberry, passion fruit, guava, acai berry. Did I say that right? I never know how to say that. But those are just some of the flavors. Here's some statistics for you folks. 1 stick of liquid IV in 16 ounces of water contains 5 essential vitamins: B3, B5, B6, B12, and even vitamin C. And we all know how important those B vitamins are. It's got 3 times the electrolytes of traditional sports drinks. It's made with premium ingredients. It's non-GMO, and it is free from gluten, dairy, and soy. I'm going to offer you a great deal, Rebels. If you go to liquidiv.com and use offer code Sherpa, you can get 20% off of anything that you order on that site when you're shopping for some better hydration. So that's Liquid IV. Check it out at liquidiv.com. Podcast that you're listening to is being presented to you in cooperation with the SJ Network. If you're a person who'd like to appear on a podcast, contact Stephen Joyner at s-j-network.com. Let's get on with the show.
Today, on the Season 10 finale of Too Many Podcasts, it's an interview with investigative reporter Robert Riggs, who is the host of the True Crime Reporter podcast.
Maybe he can help me find a good lawyer. I'm suing a pen company, and I just can't seem to draw the line.
Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, here's your host, Jim, the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels, and welcome to Too Many Podcasts. It is the podcast about podcasts and so much more. You know who I am because you've made it through the entire season with me. It's Jim, the Podcast Sherpa. Yep, that's me. And this is our Season 10 finale. Wow, that went by pretty quick, didn't it? I'm amazed that we've gotten this many episodes under our belt and that you've been sticking with us for so long. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, hey, thanks a lot for joining us. And if this is your first episode or you've been staying with us through the whole season or from the beginning, you are in for a real treat for our Season 10 finale. We are talking to a guy named Robert Riggs, who is an investigative reporter, and he's the host of the True Crime Reporter podcast. And it's a real deep dive into the workings of criminal investigation. And he had a lot to say that was really fascinating. The guy's got an amazing story, and we're going to get to know him, and we'll hear about his podcast and some of the crazy things that go on in the world of true crime. So let's have a listen to my conversation with Robert Riggs. Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpa Revolution. We are here in the interrogation room, and my guest today is a multiple award-winning journalist in his field, and he's actually the creator of a true crime podcast called True Crime Reporter, which is a Webby Award winner. I've never spoken to a Webby Award winner. This is the first for me. And he's here to let us get to know him. And we're going to talk true crime, and we're going to get to know him too. His name is Robert Riggs. He's down in the almost 100-degree state of Texas. Robert, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's certainly cooler where you are than where I am.
I just have people with large fans waving at me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd probably be the same.
So I guess since this is the interrogation show, I guess I'd expect to have beads of sweat and rubber belt out beating me here, but maybe waterboarding me, huh?
Well, I think the 100-degree heat will probably help you enough anyway.
Yes.
Now, we were talking about that. You said you were originally from Texas, and then you came up to Washington, D.C. Was that where you got your start in journalism?
It's what led me to it. I got out of Texas A&M University with an architecture and construction degree with a great interest in politics, and went to work for a senior member of Congress who started the Watergate investigation. And, I started out just as a gopher, a kid, but I eventually became an investigator for one of his defense committees. And this is the time of Watergate, and our committee was really involved on the periphery of it. So it was a constant flood of reporters coming by, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CBS. And I was the young guy. Everybody else on the committee was from intelligence agencies, and they'd been taught never to talk. And since I worked for the chairman and I kind of knew politics, I'm the guy that talked to them, and I loved what they did. I thought, this is so cool that they're really trying to get to the truth and tell people what's going on in government. And so then later, Bob Schieffer, who was the CBS correspondent on Capitol Hill at the time, later, we know of him recently as he was the anchor of CBS News and then Face the Nation. Bob helped me get started. And I went off eventually to New York City to start in broadcast TV.
I know there are probably some listeners that might be a little too young, but I'm sure being in Washington, D.C. around the time of investigating Watergate must have been pretty much a political hotbed.
Oh, it was. It was like, nothing the nation had ever seen. Every day, some new revelation, especially with the Washington Post, what their reporters were, Woodward and Bernstein.
Right.
And I mean, it was like a head spinner every day. And the member I worked for was named Wright Patman. He was chairman of the banking committee. These were the days when it was the seniority system was still in effect. If you outlived everyone, you had a chairmanship. And he was like chairman of 4 or 5 committees, but the banking committee was his law. And he got involved in the investigation because it really early on, they'd found the Watergate burglars had all this cash on, and it had been traced through some banks in Miami, and he had the authority. And so he started follow the money, which is kind of the adage of any good journalistic investigator, follow the money.
Sure.
And that's what they did. But the White House shut down his investigation. He needed subpoenas to go deeper with the committee to reelect the president. And the Nixon administration really rallied the Democrats on his committee. He was a Democrat. It had a majority of Democrats on the committee, but they got the Democrats on that committee to vote against the subpoena. Now, years later, we found out that just about every member on there that voted against that subpoena, they ended up in corruption on the take somehow, investigated by the FBI. So, but Nixon's people knew who to go after, and they shut it down. It was front page headlines, but then later his work evolved into what became the Senate Watergate Committee.
And Nixon was really renowned for having an enemies list, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, everything. And, it just made no sense. It was clear he was going to trounce George McGovern. He had this lead, but, there was a paranoia. And of course, remember at the time, we had the Pentagon Papers leak by Daniel Ellsberg, who, you probably know, just passed away here a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. And they had this plumber's unit that had broken into Ellsberg's psychiatrist office, digging for dirt about him. And so there was so much of that going on. And yeah, they had an enemies list. The investigative reporter, Jack Anderson, who had a daily column called The Washington Merry-Go-Round in the Washington Post, he was always exposing some kind of misspending in government, something, but he had really started spinning out and finding stuff about Watergate and the Nixon White House. And then it came out that G. Gordon Liddy, the ex-FBI agent who'd been involved with the Watergate burglary, had a plan to put some psychedelic dust on the steering wheel of Jack Anderson's car and cause him to hallucinate and crash as he's driving through Washington, D.C. You can't make this stuff up. It really was crazy. It really is it's a fascinating chapter in history.
I can imagine. And you were also present as a reporter during the invasion of Iraq.
Yes, I covered the first go round of Gulf War I, and went there with First Cav that were out of Fort Hood here in Texas. And then I was with CBS, and I was embedded with the lead unit of the invasion in 2003 into Iraq. That was my third war. I had gone down briefly to Honduras to cover the war in Nicaragua with the Contras that was during the Reagan administration. It really was a proxy war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and I'd done that. But I really actually got shot at up close in person in the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
You're really kind of living this life of American history of the past 50 years, Robert. Are we going to see a book from you on all of this, or is there one that's out already?
No, there's not a book. My friends ask me that a lot. And I guess my desire to write and broadcast goes into the true crime podcast now that I do, True Crime Reporter. Mm-hmm. And I've actually did a long episode. I have an occasional co-host who's a former federal prosecutor. Mm-hmm. And so in one of those episodes, he actually interviewed me about how did you get involved in Watergate investigation?
You did a 17-part podcast episode about a serial killer, which actually got made into a documentary.
Yes. The documentary is called Freed to Kill. It is on Fox Nation. It has now started it's broadcast in the United Kingdom by Peacock, and it's going on other channels over in Europe. There's a huge interest in true crime outside this country. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really, really big. And because it's Texas, there's even a bigger interest, especially with Yellowstone and 1883, Taylor Sheridan's work.
Right.
Yellowstone may be based up north, but if you wear a cowboy hat, people think you're from Texas. So this was about a notorious serial killer, probably one of the worst in the country that you've never heard of. And for a number of reasons and events, he got overshadowed and really never made it to the forefront like Bundy did. He should have. He's worse than Bundy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I even had a FBI behavioral science unit investigator from the original group tell me that. I did, as a reporter, I had come back to Texas. I was covering the White House during the Reagan administration and the beginning of George H.W. Bush. And I did the State Department, I did the Pentagon, I'd done all sorts of stuff, and was really just kind of burned out. That's a hard beat. It's 7 days a week, long hours. And I asked for reassignment, and I came to Austin, Texas. It's probably one of the most beautiful state capitals in the building and the town in the country. And it was laid back. The members wore jeans and cowboy boots and sport coats, open sport coats on the floor. I mean, and I got there thinking, well, it's going to be laid back, not the long hours anymore. And I uncovered that the parole board was selling paroles in Texas, and they had let out 68 former death row inmates. And there was and they were releasing in the dead of the night some of the worst inmates in the history of the state. And we had an epidemic of violent crime of stranger on stranger, especially in Houston, Texas. And the reporters and all lawmakers were here. I think they'd become numb to it. It really stood out to me when I came here, and I started a series of conversations with a senator who was just a few years older than me, who also, he'd become chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee. We were both like, what is going on here? And I began digging in and found this was going on. And his name is Kenneth Allen McDuff. McDuff in the early 70s, late 60s, had murdered 3 teenagers south of Fort Worth. They were just out parked listening to music at their high school, at the baseball field. Like in that age, that teenagers did. That's what you did in Texas. I'm of that vintage. You just park and play music on the radio and people talk and everything. Well, McDuff was a predator. He was a hunter, and he was out hunting, and he had an accomplice for a woman to rape and murder and anyone in his way. And that's what happened. It was horrific. They'd never seen anything like that here. And he was caught and given the death penalty. And in 1972, when the death penalty was struck down by the Supreme Court out of the Georgia case, all the sentences for the death row inmates were commuted to life. Now, no one ever imagined anybody would let these characters out, but they did, and they did it secret here in Texas. And I found this out. I was looking into the parole system because of all the violence and stuff going on, and you would always read in the newspaper stories, kind of buried in the story, it'd be inmate out on early release, parole, and it was over and over. And I was like, "What's going on here?" And so I began digging into these, and McDuff was among them, and I started focusing on him. But there were others too that I reported on. But McDuff, it turns out that I start reporting on him. He's out there somewhere, running amok, literally hunting and murdering women within blocks of the state capitol building in Austin. While we're talking about it, while there are hearings about it, he's out there killing. And I'd exposed that he was out. There were irregularities about him being out, but no one in the entire criminal justice system, the parole system, started looking. But this eventually took me to a murder in Waco, Texas, of a mother of three. Well, she was pregnant, mother of two, and was a convenience store clerk. And she vanished. She vanished from her shift, just gone. And McDuff's car had broken down. It was found about a quarter mile away, and there were two U.S. Marshals called the McNamaras, Parnell and Mike McNamara. They're like a cut of the Old West frontier. Their family's been in law enforcement for 110 years in Texas. They've been U.S. Marshals. They've been, and today, Parnell McNamara, his brother unfortunately has passed. Parnell is the 74-year-old sheriff of McLennan County, Waco, Texas. And if you go in his office, it's like going back in time. You think you're in Dodge City or you're in Matt Dillon's office. It's just amazing. But those guys got out there and beat the bushes and started a nationwide manhunt and got up. And meanwhile, I'm exposing how he got out. The parole board chairman got prosecuted. McDuff got, behind this, he got not but one, but two death penalties. He's the only man in the history of the Texas prison system who has received 3 death penalties. They did 2 because they wanted to have one for insurance this time.
Wow.
Yeah. And so he was executed, lethal injection, in 1998.
I know it actually won a Telly Award, your documentary that you were the executive producer of.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's a shocking story.
Yeah.
And what I did is I went back and assembled all of the homicide detectives. I got the U.S. Marshals that hunted for him. I got the senator that was instrumental in changing the law behind him, the one that when we both had talked about what's going on here. I got members of his victims' families. I got everybody to tell the story. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not just a story of murder and a serial killer. It's a story of corruption overlaid. And when you see the murder and mayhem that he brought in, what he did, and then you realize he got out, he shouldn't have gotten out. You realize there was bribery involved. Oh, I mean, it's just like, that's what makes it such a compelling story. Mm-hmm. But I'm telling you, it could happen again today.
Sure.
After his capture and prosecution and even before he's prosecuted, the legislature was under public pressure too. They reformed the criminal justice system for the first time more than a quarter century. And all the laws that went into effect were called the McDuff laws and named after him. So those laws ensured nobody could get out in corruption anymore, that the entire 18-member board had to vote. It made it pretty much impossible. And they also passed another statute called life without parole for capital murder. The prosecutors, and in consultation with the victims' families, now have a choice that they can just go for the life without parole sentence, and they'll never see the light of day again. But there's no appeals, none of the waiting and all of that sort of stuff going on. And that's used pretty frequently now.
It's interesting because to your point earlier that you mentioned that you spoke to everybody involved in this case, and that's really the style of your podcast. I found out, I would say the True Crime Reporter really isn't your prototypical true crime podcast because your show really offers so many different perspectives in the committing of crimes and cases that have been resolved over the course of the year.
I am so glad you noticed that, because when I set out to do this, I called it True Crime Reporter because I'm a reporter. My original vision, I wanted other police beat reporters to come on, and I do some of that. I'm starting to do more of that and talk about their stories. But, the big, most popular true crime podcast, really kind of silly, giggly stuff. They kind of offend me. I want to call them like My Favorite Murder. I'm just going to call them out. I want to say, that someone died here.
Right.
Someone or a woman was raped and will never be the same again. Or, so somebody was brutalized. So, and then the other thing I think going on, and some of the big podcasts, they've been called out, they've been called plagiarizing. Mm-hmm. Some have been called literally reading word for word from books of authors. And me being a journalist and having friends that are authors and journalists, that is so offensive to us. There's so much hard work to put in, somebody doing that on our back. So I said, look, you're going to hear from the people in the investigation. You're going to hear from the detectives. You're going to hear from victims. You're even going to hear from ex-cons. You're going to hear from people still inside, some on death row. But you're going to hear from, it's going to be the real people, and unvarnished. So, I mean, we don't gratuitously use profanity or anything like that. And we do warn when it's going to be graphic. And I really try to stay away from some of the graphic, although I go farther. I went on television. On television, you had a family audience. So on a broadcast channel, the news was before 10. And the one thing that did bother me about it was we kind of homogenized, vanilla-coded crime. And I was like, people don't really realize some of the evil out here amongst them because we're unable to tell them, but I tell them in the podcast, and I let other people tell them too. I mean, I've even had prison ministers on talking about death row. I have a wide variety of stuff. When we had the Uvalde church shooting, I had on a retired FBI agent, and she was also an FBI executive, but she conducted the landmark study of active shooters, school shooters, for the FBI. And then she built the training program. So I did 2 episodes with her. One, the profile of the mass killer and these school shooters. And secondly, she sat with me. We analyzed the video of the officers and their failure to respond, which went against all of the FBI, all of it. I mean, she was appalled about she was saying, we spent all this money and they're just standing there twiddling their thumb. So that's the kind of stuff I really try to bring to the program. Yeah.
Now, for those of you who haven't listened to Robert's podcast yet, I'm going to just do a little spoiler alert here, if you don't mind. One of your more recent episodes, you actually talked about a prison informant that you knew of who was actually rigging radios to explode to kill some of his fellow inmates.
I was on the phone with him 2 days ago. He is out. He spent 44 years in the penitentiary, in Texas prison system, in the toughest and roughest prisons in the state. He was reputedly the executioner, the assassin, the bomber for the Aryan Brotherhood, big white supremacist gang. Mm-hmm. He was one of my sources exposing the corruption. He also, it's strange. He was also an informant about corruption of corrupt guards to the system, and he'd have been killed for it. They'd known it. And he was extremely helpful to me. I had found him. I think it was by the way, he's a Mensa. He's a genius. He took every college class and trade school class offered in the Texas prison system. So he's written some stuff and sent it to me. And I have to say, there's no grammatical errors. There's no misspelled words. None of that. Nothing like I see from letters I get from this.
Right.
But a fascinating character, And matter of fact, on the phone the other day, I said, his first name is Johnny. I said, Johnny, all right, guy, those when we'd walk down the halls together and everybody was scared to death of you and that you were the executioner and what have you. And he said, Robert, in the morning, somebody gets a paper cut, and by the evening in the prison system, they've had their head cut off. That's all exaggerations about. And if you saw him in person, he's not in size, not a threatening or scary looking guy. He's kind of wiry and all.
Mm-hmm.
But he had a presence. It was
Right.
just like an aura around him. And I've had some interviews up on my YouTube channel. He's in it, and there's interestingly, I have a lot of ex-cons and inmates like to watch my television programs from the prison, and they comment on them, and they've commented on Johnny like, man, that's the most blood-chilling, cold-blooded guy I ever met. I was scared to death of him. I find the human psyche interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why true crime in many respects is so popular. You wonder what makes them tick. I know the men that listen to the podcast, they like hearing the detectives and all. They want to know that the case was resolved. How did this end and come about? The women that listen, I've got a large audience, 25 to 54 and older, of women, and they're more about, gosh, could I have spotted this guy? Could he have come into my life? Is my husband or a significant other a serial killer, a cold-blooded? Interestingly, I posted a thing once to the subscribers to my email newsletter and asked, would you rather hear about men who kill their spouses and significant others, or would you rather hear about women who do it? 99% women. They wanted to hear women who did it. And I thought, we better sleep with one eye open. And actually, and that's rare. That's a rare type deal. But I have to say, we've done some, and when these women did it, they did it with style.
Out of doing all like those really heavy, true crime episodes, was there any particular episode that maybe left you a little kind of laying awake at night, that really just kind of spooked you? I know you learned to be kind of objective as a journalist, but there's got to be certain stories that probably just scare the hell out of you.
Gosh, I want to tell you, after you've been in war zones, it's hard to scare the hell out of you more than a war zone.
That is true.
And I will say there were moments in Iraq that scared the hell out of us. My producer came to me one day and said, Robert, that story about the cat of 9 lives? We've used up those 9 lives with all the stuff that happened. But I do find myself, waking up from them, and it's about the victim. You're thinking about what happened to the person, and the hardest one is children,
right.
The child predators, the children that are abducted and murdered, and then the women. The McDuff case, it had an impact on me. It had an impact on all of the investigators. They will tell you that to this day, 30 years later, the case affects them because one of the things that happened in that case, there was a young, sweet, church-going accountant in Austin. And a couple of days after Christmas, she goes to the car wash to wash her new little white convertible. And McDuff and his accomplice, they're predators. They're on the prowl. They're always looking. That's one of the things about these serial killers. They drive hundreds of miles just looking, waiting for an opportunity. They saw her. They circled it, little like a shark, and kind of slid in quietly in a wash bay beside her. In plain view. And McDuff, who is a big man, this guy is 6'5". His hands, one of the remarkable things were his hands, how big his hands were. 2 of my hands was one of his.
Wow.
When the marshals got him, handcuffs wouldn't fit on him. They had to put leg shackles on his wrist. And he was a guy, he pumped iron all the time in the prison system, but he was just mean, like just a shark. And they snatched this girl, and some neighbors heard her screaming, oh no, not me, not me. It was the last she was ever seen. And there was a FBI profiler that I had met, one of the originals, named Roy Hazelwood, just a brilliant investigator. And he specialized in serial killers, and particularly this one. I remember him telling me, I was describing all of this to him, and he said, well, Robert, this is what we describe as a sadistic sexual serial killer. It's the suffering and the torture along with the sex that excites these guys. And they are the most difficult to catch. They're the most violent, the most brutal, the most horrible. And, there's a small group of them. He says, these guys make Bundy look like a choir boy, because what he would do, he would keep these women alive for hours and really take them to the point of death with torture, beatings, and then resume the raping in every manner you can imagine, and then beat them almost till they're dead and start again. And you just had this feeling that these women would be begging to die. Now, what happened in this case, his accomplice was caught. What his accomplice and one had witnessed just to really had sent him off the edge. And he gave a very detailed confession of what McDuff did to this young Colleen Reed. And we'd really never had that before. We really had never had someone sitting in the arena, and McDuff he wanted an audience for what, and here we got a description of it, and it's horrific. And this one Parnell McNamara, who was then a marshal then, and a tough guy, he walked out with tears in his eyes, was almost crying, and the other officers were like sick to their stomach. It's lived with them forever. The federal prosecutor that worked the case and led the manhunt for McDuff, he still every now and then wakes up with a recurring nightmare. And what it is that McDuff has got a gun and has got the draw on it. And he'll wake up in a cold sweat and he goes, oh my God, I now know how Colleen felt. So all of them, and I will tell you, it drove these investigators, men and women, to get to the bottom of finding out before he was executed where the bodies of some of these victims were, to at least, give some relief to the families that they could have a funeral and a proper burial.
Sure. Now, you were saying that you have an incredible episode that's coming up this week. Actually, it might even be out by the time people are hearing this.
It will be out Tuesday the 20th, the morning of Tuesday the 20th. But it's a really interesting story. It is about a big league ball player. This guy is a high school pitcher, hung a homemade sign on the wall of his bedroom that said, someday Brandon Puffer will be in the major leagues. And he made it there. Not only did he made it there, he made it to the Boston Red Sox and was on the team that won the World Series and broke the curse, got a World Series ring. Mm-hmm. To the top of the mountain, and 4 years later was in prison whites in a Texas prison.
Ooh.
A long, long fall. Yeah. In the Texas prison system, it is hard time. Even if you're on a medium security, it's hard time. So he tells so he's a big guy. He's a big guy.
Right.
But, people are going to come after you. But he tells a story. He ended up in a cell with a guy that was doing 3 life sentences for different murders. Bad guy.
Okay.
But they're having a big discussion, and the guy's trying to convince the big league ball player that I'm really a nice person. I'm really not that violent. And the big league ball player says, my God, you've got a Grim Reaper giant tattoo across your stomach. What do you mean you're not violent? That's Texas.
It was a nice Grim Reaper.
So it's the guy went from the bullpen to the state pen. It's a very interesting story because he learned a lesson, and he's going to talk about those lessons. He's going to talk about personal accountability, and how you're responsible for your actions. You may not think you are, but you are. And that's what caught up with him.
Yeah. And who better to hear something like that from someone who's in prison?
Yeah. Here's a guy who's been to, well-educated, everything, and then he comes out of prison. Finally comes out, in the, I'm not going to tell people what he did. I'll let them be surprised. But
yeah,
he thought, I'm a big league ball player, but he knows me. I've got good references, and I'll get probation. Now, the jury slapped a big sentence on put him. And when he came up for parole, he thought, I'm a big league ball player. Everybody knows me. I'll make parole. No, they set him off. You're going to do your time. So when he comes out of prison after being, he's got a World Series ring. He comes out of prison and he gets a job. The only job you get, he's a janitor and maintenance guy and all at a minor league baseball field in Round Rock, Texas. For a team that is managed by Nolan Ryan's son. Nolan Ryan, the great Hall of Fame. But you talk about, going from the mound and the World Series and these other teams to you're the janitor. Yeah, there's a lot of, in this one, there's a lot of life lessons in it. That's what I really liked about it.
Mm-hmm. Talk about a preview, folks. You got to hear it. Actually, the show will be out actually by the time this airs, but
yes.
Make sure you check it out if you're going to be checking out Robert's podcast. Now, while we're talking about podcasts, I'm sure, actually, before I get into that, I know you have a website, robertriggs.com, and you have a library section that lists a lot of very important literature that folks should read, if they want to get along in business or even in life. And I know you talk about podcasts too that are important to you that people should check out. So I was curious, what are some of the podcasts that you do enjoy, Robert?
I do have to confess, I have not kept up with that library. I'm so busy with the podcast, which is over on truecrimereporter.com. Mm-hmm. And by the way, on it, I'm starting to have on some authors of true crime stories. And one of the ones I did recently that's timely, it was fascinating. It's the little girl who grew up next door to the Unabomber. Mm-hmm. And, he just recently committed suicide. Right. But it's her story living next door. And there was no one else living next door. And wow, is it an interesting story? But she'd written a book, but not out there. But I found out about the book. And now I've got other authors writing me because a lot of these, there's so many books, they just fall into obscurity. And I've got a pretty good listenership. And mm-hmm. These are interesting stories. And these authors, they put a lot of time into it. So yeah. But in terms of podcast, I actually I don't listen to true crime podcast. I listen to business podcast. I listen to kind of internet marketing podcasts. There's one called Creator Science that I like. And they kind of keep you up to date on the latest, greatest things you ought to be doing and thinking about with the social media channels. They just change. Good Lord, they change so fast, so much. There's one, I met this woman recently at a conference. It's Rocky Mountain Marketing. I like her because she's just straightforward. And every Thursday, she's got a quick cast, no longer than 15 minutes, about some new development, something new Facebook has done. It's a way to keep up with it because you do have to, keep marketing. You got to keep marketing to get listeners.
Sure.
In the podcast space, I like Podcast Insider with Todd Cochran. He is the owner of Blueberry Hosting. And Todd is a Navy veteran, fascinating career. During the hunt for bin Laden and stuff, really, really interesting stuff. So that's one I listen to just to keep up with it. And his partner and his tech guy is a guy named Mike Dell. And of course, with the military stuff, I went to a military school, Texas A&M. So I'm attracted I like the discipline and smart of these guys. Mike Dell was in the early wave of fighter bombers that came into Baghdad in 1990. And if you remember, there was the live footage from CNN from the crew that was at the top of that hotel, and you saw all of that artillery rounds and missiles going up. I mean, it looked like the 4th of July.
Yeah, the reporter was hiding under his desk, right? When he was
yeah. And it was aimed at these guys. And, Mike was a kind of the electronic warfare navigator in the back seat of this aircraft, an F-111. I mean, you got to have some cojones, talk about scared. So I like these guys. They're down to earth. So that's my favorite for podcasting. I'm telling you, if you were going to host a podcast, start a pod, these are the guys to talk to. Mm-hmm. And they're really technologically, they're really ahead of most of the industry. I like to listen to a guy named Joe Paluzzi. He's got a little podcast thing called Content Inc. He kind of coined the term content marketing. Just straightforward. He does an annual conference. And right now, what's really got my attention that I met at Joe's conference just recently, it's called the Marketing Artificial Intelligence Podcast. And it's about AI. And it's two guys that are very bright. They've been on this for a number of years, weren't getting any attention. And when ChatGPT hit, they're all over it. They'd already been there. Mm-hmm. And they're putting on a big conference in Cleveland. I think the thing sold out in a matter of minutes in July. But they're they're my go-to place to go to find out, okay, what's the latest development in AI with all the stuff coming out? And I'm going to get it, straight, no BS. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm getting spam all the time of earn $10,000 a day with AI, and I just click delete. These guys, these are real. These are real guys. And I'm using it in some of the stuff I'm doing, all for efficiencies to save time. Todd Cochran at Blueberry, Todd and I were talking. Todd had been thinking about hiring an assistant. He didn't do it. Stuff he needed for an assistant that he could program, he's doing through AI, and I'm doing some of the same myself. I like Work Life with Adam Grant. He's a organizational psychologist that looks at businesses and stuff. Really interesting insights. There's a congressman I like to listen to. Very sharp guy. He's in Houston, named Dan Crenshaw. Dan is a SEAL. He lost his eye on a mission with the SEAL team. So you might see him on the House floor with a patch. But he's a Republican, but he's a middle of the road. He's not a right-wing nut and stuff. I mean, we had just more common sense like him. And after having worked there and knowing the place, I really do respect his work. There's another podcast called Cleared Hot with Andy Stump. Andy was a SEAL Team 6 guy. He holds one of the record for flying in wingsuits. He's an amazing guy. And he has on the most interesting guest, and from military backgrounds. He had the guy that just recently got the Medal of Honor from Biden and stuff. To 2.5 hours talking about. He had one the other day. Was an F-35 pilot. Had been an F-16 before that. Talking about the F-35 and talking about the Tom Cruise Top Gun 2 that came out, about how realistic it was. But hey, I grew up wanting to fly, learned to fly Piper Cub, so that's always kind of been in my blood. And so I love those things, especially after, just covering the, I covered the Pentagon and all. Mm-hmm. And there's another one. I'm looking through my list here.
You got a big list there, Robert.
Well, I think I do what most people do. If I'm in the shower, if I'm cooking, if I'm washing clothes, I got the washing clothes duty here. The wife is. And, driving, especially driving, like we're driving to go shoot stuff. We do television as well. I've always got a podcast listening, and this one is Jack Carr, Danger Close, another SEAL who's got the TV show out on Amazon, and he's amazing. Great story. They're great storytellers. That's what they're blessed with. And what I like about them, they're not living in the past of, I was this great SEAL and stuff. They really do. They get veterans on that are entrepreneurs. They talk about their businesses. And then there are other experiences. They have guys come on that had incredible missions, and they talk to them. And then one it hadn't been on in a while. I don't know where they've gone, but there's one called Intelligence Matters. It's with Mike Morrell. Mike was acting director of the CIA, and he kind of tells it like it is. He's has a lot of ex-CIA people on. So if you want to kind of stay in touch, what's going on in the world? What's the threat in China? What's the threat with the Iranians and all? It's a great place to go. Just phenomenal. And, listen, I listen to those things because having been a congressional staffer, I know that on a defense committee, I know that this can impact our life. You can wake up one morning and what the hell has happened? The stock market's gone to hell, everything else. My personal feeling is we're in one of the most dangerous times in the modern history of America. When I was with the committee, it was the Cold War and containment. And then I covered President Reagan and when the wall fell and all of that. And I thought, wow, nothing more to worry about, peace in the world. And then here comes Osama bin Laden. And I actually, I was covering the crime and the story I told you about, and I turned to terrorism. And, that's what took me to the war. And I did heavy terrorism reporting in London and all after the invasion. But now today, the Iranians, the Russia, what they're doing to the Ukraine, the genocide, and China, and it really is an uncertain time, and that uncertainty I think is what's contributed to the inflation and what's happened with business, because the worst thing you can do in business is create uncertainty. So that's kind of the rundown. There's a number of newsletters that I also subscribe to, but listen, I'm one that you got to always be learning. That are you going to wake up and your job's gone? And so because, I want to tell you, my world a number of times got jerked out from under my feet. And fortunately, I was always inquisitive, always doing and other things. And I had another plan, I had a fallback, another place to go. So, and I'm from a rural Texas, little small Texas town. And I've seen middle class jobs that people were able to send their kids to college and help the town. They all went away. They all went to China. They all went overseas. And it really has been, it's been sad. It's been painful to see this happen.
So we have a portion of the show that is called Shameless Self-Promotion. You get to talk about your stuff now. And, I know people have got some episodes to look forward to, but How about laying a little shameless self-promotion on us for you, Bob?
Shameless self-promotion.
Well, I would encourage everybody, if you're not a Fox Nation subscriber, to go see Freed to Kill. That's the name of our documentary. It's I believe me, it's unlike any documentary that you'll ever see. I know Fox News, they've caused a lot of trouble, a lot of controversy. Fox Nation is kind of a separate entity. It's streaming. But I do have to say this for Fox. They supported me. They paid for the whole thing. At the time, I was out there on the market. We'd gone through Black Lives Matter and anti-police, and a lot of the major channels, they didn't want to touch it. And Fox Nation took it on. And it's not about street cops. It's about, professional investigators.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated that. And, I told them, look, there's a part of this corruption took place in a Republican administration. And I know, know you lean to the conservative. And they were like, no problem. Just tell your story. I appreciated that. So I'm working on, I've got some more in the works. They're all Texas-based. I've got some I'm working on that are Texas Rangers. And you're talking about a whole nother persona there. There's a mystique. Well, there's a mystique about Texas, but there's a real mystique about the Texas Rangers. We're celebrating their bicentennial, 200 years this year. I'm on the bicentennial committee. I grew up knowing Rangers. My dad was involved with law enforcement, and they are, they're in one way, they're bigger than life, but they don't act like they're bigger than life. They specialize in murder, in complex investigation. They assist sheriffs and small police departments in the rural areas of Texas, not the big cities that have resources. They help, out in, as I would say, the boondocks of Texas, and they're terrific investigators, and they have this presence, and it's very, very difficult to become a Texas Ranger. Really, it's like becoming a SEAL. Frankly, maybe harder than becoming a Navy SEAL. So they are so interesting. You don't hear from them when there's a press conference that a case solved, a murderer caught. They stand in the background. The sheriff that's asked for the help, he stands at the podium. He gets all the credit. They don't take credit. They don't want credit, and it's kind of in their DNA. There is a saying. I was talking to a legendary Ranger, and he said to me, he said, Robert, if you're a Ranger, you should be able to walk into a cafe in Texas without your characteristic white Western shirt, white cowboy hat, and your distinctive Cinco Peso badge and gun belt on, and everybody on there knows you're a Ranger. And it's really true. There is this just presence, aura when they walk into a room. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. So I've got some stuff coming with them. I got some podcasts coming with them. And this probably be the first podcast you've really ever heard them deep in their cases. So there's great interest overseas in Texas because of Yellowstone, great interest because of the Western aspect of it, 1883. So they're going to love that. And I'm telling you, they're so interesting. I love being around them. I love hearing their stories, talking with them, and they're all humble. It takes a little doing to get them to open up, but when you do, you can get them casual. It's very interesting, and I've got some of those coming.
I'm sure it's going to be another great segment from you. His name is Robert Riggs, again, the host of True Crime Reporter. Trademark. We have to say the little trademark, right? We need a little mark there. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, I've really enjoyed it, and if some of you choose to start listening, tell me what you think. Fan at truecrimereporter.com. I read them all. Fan at truecrimereporter.com. Actually, one of the things that's started to happen is that people are from around the country asking for help. A loved one is cold case and that sort of thing. And I've sort of got a network of retired officers that can actually reach out and talk with them and give them expert advice. If you go to my website, you'll see on there's a gentleman named Lou Fawcett. And if you go there, Lou is all Texas, big gray beard, Texas cowboy hat. Lou was one of the best fugitive hunters in the country, worked out of the prison system, assigned to an FBI violent crime task force. Oh my God, Lou has been in shootouts. He's been in close quarter shootouts in hotel rooms, the stories he's got. But Lou helps out. Somebody will call and they'll say, we don't think the police are taking our case separately, and seriously, and he'll do a call. So anyway, we're trying to grow, trying to help. That's our whole purpose, is try to also get help for people.
There you have it once again, Mr. Robert Riggs. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Now it's time for Sherpa Samples. If you've got a podcast you'd like us to sample, contact us and we'll mention your name on the show.
And here we are, Rebels. It's time for Sherpa Samples, and it's when I get to pull 10 podcasts off the charts, check out an episode or two of them, and let you know what they're all about. And if there is a podcast that you like to listen to that I haven't spoken about yet, do me a favor and reach out to me either on social media at Sherpolution, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Sorry, I drew a blank there. And let me know. And if I do sample your podcast, I will mention your name on this very show. But let's talk about the ones that I've listened to right now. And first off, we have Rachel Maddow-Deja News. And it's a look back on events in history that are actually reflective on some of the events going on in the current day. And the episode that I listened to was about protesters who were stopping the transfer of power after an election. And this was happening actually in France in the 1930s. Really interesting stuff. And coincidentally, this was not planned. I was also listening to a podcast called Prosecuting Donald Trump. There's some legal folks, Andrew Weissman and Mary McCord. And they basically break down each week about the different indictments that have been brought against former President Donald Trump. And a lot of legal analysis here. It really provides a good light to understand what exactly is going on with this case. So if you're curious and you really want to get your facts straight, this is a really good podcast to check out. Next up was Triforce, which was 3 British guys. At least I think they're all British. I know 2 of them are. The third guy doesn't sound British, but what do I know? And I know originally it started off as a conversation about gaming, but now some of these episodes, they just talk about whatever, and they have some interesting conversations. They're goofy, they're friends. It's, I believe, 2 dads and a millennial having these conversations. So check it out. It's definitely an interesting type of humor. And, we don't get to talk about Australian podcasts very often. And, I am listened to in the land of Down Under. Hi there, folks. And this one is called Hamish and Andy. They were drive time radio disc jockeys. And now they've got a podcast. Very Australian humor. So bring your Vegemite? No, we don't have to bring Vegemite. That's... I don't know. Are they as funny as Lord Mr. Bruce? I don't know. Lord Mr. Bruce always makes me laugh anyway. For our folks in the land down under, or if you're not down in Australia and you want to catch some Australian humor, this is the podcast that you want to check out. They've been doing it for quite some time, so they've definitely got some good chemistry going on. The Greatest Generation is hosted by Adam and Ben, whom I think were the hosts of a podcast that I listened to once before called Citation Needed. It's not about the World War II generation. It's about Star Trek: The Next Generation, where they talk about every episode. And if you enjoyed Citation Needed, it's that same kind of humor between the guys. And if you like Star Trek, there's another reason to check this podcast out. They definitely have a good time talking about this show. And they go off on their little tangents. But hey, why not? And I believe they're on the Maximum Fun Network, as is this next one called Judge John Hodgman. Now, John Hodgman isn't an actual judge. He's actually an actor. But what happens in this podcast is people have agreed to bring their arguments to him and abide by his resolution of these arguments. And sometimes they're very minute things, not the major legal type. I mean, they'll have one, is a hot dog a sandwich? The episode that I listened to had to do with a woman deleting someone's Pokemon off of his account. So you can tell that one's not going to be heard by the Supreme Court. But Judge Hodgman does a really good job of that. And he's really smart. He's very well-read. And I know he's published a lot of books. He's very big on trivia and he definitely knows a lot. Very knowledgeable man. So why wouldn't he be a judge? I think he can solve that Pokemon problem. Further, Radio Rental. It's a collection of spooky stories. And in an interesting format, I didn't realize until I was done listening to this episode that the narrator in the show is Rainn Wilson, an actor who was in the TV show The Office, and he's done a lot of other things since then, I imagine. And he's very funny. It's a very interesting way of piecing very scary stories together. He plays like a radio DJ, so it's a pretty cool take on a horror podcast. I listened to an audio drama also called The Royals of Malibu, and it's about a young girl who's a, what do they call them? A webcam girl, where they take off their clothes and stuff like that. And she's without her parents, and it turns out that a friend of her father's takes her in to his home in Malibu, where they're very rich, and she is adjusting to live to this lifestyle. And of course, there's a lot going on because it's an audio drama, of course. This Host is a daily gossip show, and it is hosted by sisters Jackie and Claudia Oshry. I guess they were popular on Instagram, and now they've got a podcast, and they've been doing this for a while, too. They talk about all different sorts of things. I know the TV shows, and I guess they keep pretty busy, and, they're big on the reality TV show and all those things, such as Vanderpump Rules. Now, why am I mentioning Vanderpump Rules again? Because you know what happened the last time I talked about it. I was like, I was all grimacing. But there's another podcast from more cast members of the show, and it's called When Reality Hits with Jax and Brittany. So I guess they were a married couple that were on Vanderpump Rules. And I got to say, compared to the other ones that I've checked out, they're actually pretty good. They come off as a very likable couple. There doesn't seem to be a lot of drama in their lives anyway. But of course, they were talking about all the drama on Vanderpump Rules, and and that was it for me. As I said in the previous episode, reality TV shows always have a villain. Don't act so surprised. And speaking of surprises, we're going to head into the outro.
Let's get back to the Sherpa. Sorry about that.
A very special thanks to Robert Riggs, and make sure you check out his podcast, the True Crime Reporter podcast. And if you are enjoying this podcast, if you could do me a little favor and head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a nice little review. And by doing that, for your kindness, you will be entered into a contest where you can possibly win some podcast merchandise. Isn't it amazing that I always get to sing that part? I don't know why. I'm a horrible singer. And you get to hear it anyway. So if you want to follow us on social media, it is Sherpalution on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and TikTok, and also on YouTube. We've been broadcasting these episodes on YouTube as well. No video, just audio, because you don't want to see my face. You're welcome. I'm a nice guy that way. So, as I said earlier, this is the Season 10 finale, and you know what that means, that next week we will be doing a big wrap-up for Season 10 and thanking everybody who played a big part in getting this season going. And Season 11 will be coming back in 2 weeks. We've got some interesting guests coming up. I've got some things in the works. I'm waiting to hear from some people to finalize some interviews, and hopefully you will be coming back and checking us out on all the podcast apps that are out there, or Sherpalution.com, or on the YouTube channel. It's all there. So pick your favorite place to listen and come back every Wednesday, and we will be there for you. And until then, we'll be getting next week's episode ready and getting ready for Season 11. And we hope that you will be joining us for this journey through Mount Podcastia. And until then, I say to you folks, Viva la Sherpalution. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpalution. Viva la Sherpalution. Oh. Yeah, I'll come back now, you hear?
You know, Rebels, if you've been checking out some of my promotional ads on social media, you will be aware that I have been using a lot of AI programs to help me create ads. But you know what? There's a lot more uses for AI than just funny little videos. And I'd like to introduce one of our new sponsors, Podium. It is a leader in creating AI tools for podcasters. Now, let's say you've got a podcast, or maybe you're even thinking of doing a podcast. You're probably wondering, well, how can AI be integrated with your workflow? I'll tell you about Podium. As a podcaster, you know that writing show notes and creating chapters and transcribing episodes takes a lot of time, and it can cost you a lot of money too. But you know what? That's where Podium comes in. It's an AI tool designed specifically for creators and podcasters with the goal of making post-production tasks quick and easy. And in just a few minutes, Podium generates show notes, chapters, summaries, clips for social media, a full transcript, suggested episode titles, social media posts, and more. Whew, that's a lot of work for one little program. Your show notes are key to your podcast's success because it helps new listeners find your podcast and they'll know if it's a fit for them. You know, kind of like Too Many Podcasts. It also improves your SEO, that's your search engine optimization. Ooh, big phrase there. And overall accessibility. And with Podium, you can focus on creating a great podcast and let Podium's AI do the heavy lifting. But Podium isn't just for solo creators and podcasters. It's a game changer for editors, producers, marketers, agencies, and production studios. Teams that use Podiums are able to increase workloads, decrease turnaround times, and improve their quality. How does it work? Very easy. First, go to Podium's website, and you'll see that link that's right there in the show notes. You get 3 hours free just to try it. Pretty cool, huh? And using that link also supports this show as well. And you know what else happens? Because I'm a good guy. You use my link, you will get 50% off for your first month. So visit the site, upload an MP3 file, and download your files, and that's it. And if you need anything else, you can use Podium GPT to generate articles and any marketing copy you might need in seconds. Instant show notes, transcripts, chapters for your podcast or channel. This will level up that podcast. So check out Podium today.